Hi, thanks for joining us on the West London Sport YouTube channel. I'm here with Ian McCullough, West London Sport journalist, and Paul Warburton, the former sports editor of the Fulham Chronicle, to talk a bit about Fulham and their season so far. We'll start with you, Paul. Obviously, the January transfer window has now come to an end. Not the busiest in terms of incomings, with Josh Maja obviously coming in on loan until the end of the season, and a few players going out on loan. When you look at the transfer business that they've done, are you pleased with it? And do you think it's enough getting Maja in on loan to boost the team, or would you really have liked to have seen them done a bit more during the window?
They tried a bit more. They tried for Josh King at the same time. But, I mean, if you were Josh King, would you go to a struggling side that might get relegated, or would you go to Everton? It's not really much of a choice, is it? Oh, sorry, not much of a difficult choice in that respect. So, yeah, Fulham wanted two strikers at least, because that's where they need them most. So I guess the cup is half full. Maja, we'll see what happens with him. He comes from France League One, and that isn't the same as the Premier League by a long way. And as John Michael Seri and Maxime Le Marchand have discovered, because they're headed on back there after failing to cut it at Fulham. So Maja's going to have to do something rather extraordinary. So I think it's going to be tricky.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because he had a great spell at Sunderland when he was there in League One. I remember, I don't know if you caught the Netflix documentary, Sunderland Till I Die. He was almost sort of the bit of the villain, wasn't he, in that? He was sort of pushing for a move and was kind of weighing up his options and ended up moving on. But certainly, obviously, it's a couple of levels below the Premier League, so we probably can't read too much into it. But he had a great spell there and scored a lot of goals and looked really promising. Ian, what did you make of that signing? Do you think he's enough to give Fulham a boost? Or, like I said, do you think, obviously, they tried for more, but did they really need to get some more over the line in this window?
Yeah, look at it and go, I mean, is he much better than what they've already got? I mean, I think they do need bodies in there. They need some extra legs. I mean, the problem really is Mitrovic hasn't cut it this year. I mean, he is a good player, and is he falling between that stall of someone that's very good in the Championship, not good enough for the Premier League? But for what they paid for him, and the levels he's played at, and he's an international footballer for Serbia, he should be doing a lot better than what he is. And Carvalho, he's very honest, and he works really hard on that. But he's not a natural forward, so I guess having another option there does give him some extra bodies. But I mean, to expect someone to come in who's never scored goals above League One in England, and he's not playing for one of the big hitters in Ligue 1 in France, it's you'd be hanging your hat a bit to say that he's going to fire the goals that keep them up. But Scott Parker said the other night they've got to start winning matches, and I think really the problem lies in that some of the big hitters like Loftus-Cheek, Mitrovic have got to do a lot more, really, because that's where the problem lies.
Ian touched on it there, Paul, and you've written about this yourself on the site about some of the weaknesses that Fulham have had this season. What do you see as the big issues this year and behind this terrible run of form that they've been on?
Well, going back to Mitrovic, his season collapsed in a great pack of cards, didn't it, when he missed that penalty for Serbia against Scotland? Had it been, for example, one of two or three Serbian misses again, but that might have just got him out of jail. But no, it was the penalty that put his country out of the European Championships. That's a horrible millstone to take with you by anybody's standards, and he just hasn't been able to regain that confidence that he had in the Championship. I also don't think they're playing to his strengths as much. I mean, he's basically a man in the box, and he's basically somebody who'll get on the end of a cross. That's it. He's not going to run at defences and get past them by any stretch of the imagination. So if you don't play to Mitro's strengths like that, you don't get anywhere. The rest of the attack, Ian touched on, Caballero. I never like, Ian's right on, by the way, but you never like the idea of somebody being called honest. It usually betrays the idea they're not as good as you'd like them to be. Yes, they're honest, but they don't produce anything. And Caballero's a bit like that. Parker talks about him stretching defences, and he does that. But, control, finished product, all of that, it's missing. Loftus-Cheek comes in much the same bracket. Yes, he's had a terrible run of injury, and yes, he's only getting back into form, but he's played 18 times this season. And I'm, you know, it just does not do enough. And the real problem for Fulham is going to be that goal thing. The defence, great. The attack, not so good.
It's a real shame with Loftus-Cheek because he looked such a good player before that injury. He really did. That spell he had at Palace, he looked a Rolls Royce for footballer, and you know he started for England in the last World Cup. He looked, you know, at the start of the season, you say it's a great signing, and he shows flashes of that kind of what he can do. But you know, Paul's right. You need more from him for what he's earning and what he's there to do. And I think the boy alongside him as well, Anguissa's similar. You know, he's got all the tools and the size, and you think he should be a lot better than what he is, but he looks, I don't want to say it, but he looks kind of soft sometimes. He's not, you know, he should be dominating the middle of the park. He does, and I think that's where the problem lies for them, because as Paul said, defensively they've been very good. You know, Harrison Reed's done pretty well since he come in here. He gives a bit of bite in the middle of the park, but he's not the sort of player you expect that's going to open up a defence or kind of, you know, make direct runs that are going to hurt the back four. But I will say I feel a bit sorry for Scott Parker, because I think he's kind of paying the price for the terrible, the largesse of the Djukanovic 2 years ago when they signed, you know, the likes of Seri, and money was spent, just ridiculous amounts of money for players that weren't good enough, and he's now having to, you know, deal with players that are on loan. You know, I'm assuming if they wanted Josh King, they could have probably, if they had gone over the odds and paid for it, they probably could have got him. But the money's not there. They won't spend the money, and he's basically almost playing with one hand behind his back in many ways.
You see, Ian, this is where I might actually think to say, I think Fulham have been canny in the transfer market. Like you said, back 2 years ago, they spent 110 million and got very little for it. You know, this year they've spent 10 million and obviously have got augmented the setup with loans, clever loans at that, if you like. Now, often forgotten is what you get for failing in the Premier League. So 2 years ago, when they went down, they took 110 million pounds for failing, for relegation. I mean, so the fact of the matter is that if you hang on to that kind of money or use it wisely, for failing, you get well rewarded. Fulham has spent 10 million this time round. If they get relegated, it won't be the worst thing in the world. Yes, those loans will go back, but they will have actually got a broad, if you like, surface of players who could probably get them up next year as well. So essentially, I think the Khans are gambling on, one, finishing fourth bottom, or bouncing straight back next season as well. And I think that is probably quite shrewd. Yes, Parker's in the middle of that, but I bet he understands it.
But those loans aren't free, though, are they? I mean, Chelsea didn't lend Fulham Loftus-Cheek. They're paying probably about £5 million for a loan fee. You know, the goalkeeper who's been magnificent, Areola, you know, that won't be a free loan from PSG. These loans are costing money.
Yeah, but they're buttons, they're buttons compared with... I mean, you pay £1 million for Joachim Andersen, who, for me, has been the best player in the team by a long way. $1 million for Joachim Andersen, playing as he is? Wow. You know, people would bite your hand off for that. He's undoubtedly been a star in the Premier League and will be in the future, in my opinion. Possibly not with Fulham, but certainly somewhere else. So, yeah, I take your point. They're not free loans. And yes, you are paying a lot of wages and stuff like that. But compared with spending out 110 million, it's a bit more prudent.
Sure. I do think, I mean, they've been a little bit, you know, in football, we talk about fine margins. If Mitrovic scores that penalty against Newcastle early in the season, if, Sheffield United and Lookman scores that penalty against Newcastle, Bobby Cordova-Reid doesn't hit the post last week against West Brom, that goes in when they're 1-0 up. If Loftus-Cheek doesn't have one off the line against Brighton, the narrative changes, but that's partly where they are, really. It's just that
Ian, you can remember those. You can remember those incidents as being fine margins. You look at Leicester the other night, watch them move. You know, their shape and movement was lightning. You know, they create chances by the sackful. And so do a lot of the other top clubs. Yes, they miss a few, but the chances come and come and come and come. Fulham create very, very few, and that's their real problem. They have this. The defence is terrific. as good as a lot of Premier League defences, but they kind of move methodically, deliberately, slowly. Yes, it looks okay. And then they get to the final third. And then, as you rightly point out, you can remember the chances they create. They're just not that many.
Yeah. I mean, to be fair to them, I mean, against Spurs, they played well against Spurs. They played well against Liverpool. Lookman's been quiet the last few weeks. He was very good when he came against Tottenham. He really gave him a bit of impetus on the flank, and they need a bit more from him, really. But you're right, as you say, it just, you know, the problem with the Premier League, when you're at the bottom, you start looking at the fixtures and say, well, we've got Fulham, we've got West Ham on Saturday. They're flying at the minute, and then, you know, you've got Everton away. That's never going to be easy. Then you've got two kind of Sheffield United at home. That's a winnable game. I'm looking at it here. I think it's what have they got after that? It's
yeah, I'm looking at the fixtures too, and you're quite right. There are some winnable games there,
big
but
games
in amongst all those fixtures to come right to the end of the season, you've got to play Spurs, Liverpool, Manchester City, Arsenal, Chelsea, Manchester United. You know, with the stranger things have happened, but you're not banking on those. You're looking at Burnley. You're looking at, after West Ham, you look at Sheffield United at home. For me, that's pivotal. That game on the 20th of February against Sheffield United at home, don't win that, I think you can start getting that fat lady to warm up her vocal cords.
Yeah, I just want to bring back to you something you said earlier, Paul, about obviously getting the loan signings in and not committing big money like they have done previously. It kind of reminds me of what Norwich did last season. They built a good foundation, but when they came up, they got a fair bit of criticism for it from their own fans and from other football fans and pundits as well for not investing more. It's a difficult one, isn't it? Because a lot of people might say that Fulham doing a similar thing maybe shows a sort of lack of ambition about staying up, because there's no guarantee that if you do go back down that you will get back up again. I mean, can you kind of see that point?
Sort of. As I said earlier, you also get 100 million for failing. You know, I mean, the Fulhams of this world aren't competing with the likes of Rotherham. You know, if we're talking about back in the Championship, Parker himself said, "Okay, we're going to get beaten an awful lot of times in the Premier League." But if they had lost once in the Championship, it was like, oh, you know, ready the alarm and so on and so forth. You've got a decent chance if you go down with the kind of money Fulham have behind them to come straight back up again. So, like I say, that loan thing, I think was pretty shrewd. Admittedly, that defence is going to look a bit decimated, but if they do go down, but in amongst that, they've got Adebayo, Tosin, as I believe he now wishes to be called, and Anthony Robinson, and they look great acquisitions, you know?
Yeah, Robinson looks very good.
And, really good. So, you know, I think coming straight back up again, I'd put a £5 on them right now.
Yeah, I don't know about that. I mean, they didn't exactly, they struggled over the line last season, didn't they, to get up? You know, a lot of those similar players that are still there. But you're right. I mean, there's enough talent in there to, if they do go down, they should be knocking on the door, but there's no guarantee in the Championship. It's so tough. And, you know, you've seen it with QPR. You spend big money, you go up, you go back down again. And, you know, it's the parachute money works to a degree, but, you know, the longer you spend down there, the harder it gets.
Yeah, QPR, I think it were, I mean, that was a crazy time. You know, I don't think anybody at QPR would say
Fulham spent more money than QPR in that period when they went up 2 years ago. They did exactly everything QPR did. They shouldn't do.
Yes.
You know, take a side that went up and did well going up, and then filled it with mercenaries. Spent 150 million quid for players that weren't good enough, and went straight back down. Come back up through the playoffs. Go back down again 2 years later. I mean, hopefully they, you know, for them they make a better fist of it if they do go down than QPR have. But it's hard. It's not easy at all.
Yeah, I think. You know, I think Parker's key to this. I think he's got to stay. I mean, I know he gets a lot of criticism. They lose games and fans are on the websites and the forums complaining Parker out. But who do you get in? You know, you want somebody that's sharp, shrewd, got a different way of thinking, who is an important influence at the club. He's always been that, Parker, since the day he arrived, you know, whether as a player or after he retired and so on. And, you know, as long as you keep him and you keep a kind of a policy going on, they stand a lot better chance. The thing about QPR was they were shifting managers along. you know, in a haphazard, random kind of way, and spending money on people that were crazy time, you know. I mean, crazier than Fulham, in my opinion.
But I do agree on Parker. Parker has to stay. I think the job Parker did getting them up last year shouldn't be underestimated. You know, no one we all hear how great Brentford are and this and that, but he completely out-tacticked Thomas Frank in that final at Wembley. So he showed he has got a kind of a tactician's, you know, brain about him. But it's very tough being in the Premier League when, you know, you're not winning. It doesn't matter who the manager is if you haven't got the squad, you haven't got the players to do it. It's very hard.
Yeah, things obviously.
And he's kept them competitive. They have to be competitive. I mean, he's had to. That defence looked the shower at the start of the season. He's tightened up at the back again. Shows that he's got the ability. He can do that, and you know, it's now scoring goals. They've got to work out how they're going to do that.
Yeah, things obviously they're looking bleak at the moment, but there's no saying they're still in with a shout. You know, they're not so far adrift that they can't get out of it. So it's still very possible. I mean, Paul, do you think they can get out of it, and how much of that will depend on Mitrovic refinding his goal scoring touch? Because I think he's only scored 2 Premier League goals this season. I think it's 26 he got last year in the Championship. I know it's obviously a lower level, so maybe you can't compare, but you would expect the guy who scored 26 goals in the league below to at least, you know, reach double figures maybe in the Premier League, but that's looking unlikely. I mean, how much of them getting out of it depends on him improving.
It's funny, you as you say, it's not comparable, the Championship and the Premier League. The teams in the second half of the Championship, you know, I mean, they would get slaughtered every week in the Premier League. No two ways about it. And that was when Mitro was cashing in goal after goal. He was asked that question, Parker, a while back. Is he just a very good Championship player, or is he, you know, somebody who's just out of form in the Premier League? Well, frankly, I think Mitro's a bit of each. You know, he's not in good nick. He betrays it on the pitch. He does this hands up in the air, anguished, you know, why is the world so unfair to me look that you see so many times, Ian, you know, when he's actually, you know, things are not going well for him. And so I don't think he's in the zone right now. But I want Fulham to stay up. Of course I do. That would be great for West London and great for the club too. Do I think they'll stay up? They got some tough fixtures. They're going to have to pull rabbits out of hats. They're going to have to win against the likes of Leeds and Southampton away and things like that, you know, that you think that's going to be an ask. Because they've got 14 points. Safety, the first safety side is now on 22. So you're reckoning, aren't you, that maybe 40 points will obviously be good enough, just about possibly to stay up.
Yeah,
well, you know,
40 sort of 37.
You're going to need 7. You're going to need 7 wins. You're going to need 7 wins when you've got 2, and you're going to have to beat teams that so far, you know, have been beyond you. So they've
done it before, haven't they? Under Hodgson, they had that remarkable season where they somehow stayed up. So but I do. I mean, not having fans at the ground is a factor, because you know, when you are struggling, you need the support of the fans. And you know, on a night game at Craven Cottage, the noise can be quite loud just to get behind the team. I mean, the Leicester game midweek, I'd write it off. Leicester are a great side. They're a very good side. It happens, you know, but that's the worst I've seen Fulham play this season, because they're up against a good side. I think the other games I've seen them play, they've been okay. They have been. It's just again that fight. West Ham's going to be a tough game Saturday, but you look at it and say it's a game you can win, because West Ham aren't as good as Leicester. If you look at taking the Liverpool game, the way they play against Liverpool aren't going great this season, but they're still, you know, one of the best teams in Europe and still the champions. If they can play like they did for an hour, if they can play like they did in the first hour against Liverpool and West Ham, they can win that game. But it's going to be they have to win. I think Saturday they have to win. If they get beat at home by West Ham, it's going to be very tight now, because as you say, the running's really tough. And just confidence as well. They haven't won for 11 games. When you're not winning, that does factor in as well. And I do wonder if that West Brom game as well, when they were winning and playing so well, not scoring that second goal and having to kind of come away with a point, has had a kind of an effect on the confidence?
Well, it's got to, hasn't it? I mean, you're cruising against West Brom. You're showing them just who's boss. You score a second goal, maybe even a third. Game over. No two ways about it. West Brom aren't going to come back from 2 or 3-0 down without a shadow of doubt. But one, I mean, all you need is a deflection. And they got one, didn't they, West Brom?
Yeah.
It was a deflection that came off a player into the path of Bartley, if I remember rightly. And you're drawing. And then you start to crumble. Parker will have hated that moment, say, from about 45, 50 minutes to the hour mark. They were looking chalk and cheese to that first half team, and he's got to be worried about that because Parker loves consistency. And I think you're right. There are 1 or 2 games that are gimmies, if you know what I mean by that. Ones where you expect you've got to win. Like I said, Burnley. Well, maybe not so much Burnley, but certainly Sheffield United at home. You've got to win that. There's just no two ways about it. They don't win on February the 20th. Come back to me then and ask me if Fulham are going to be relegated, and I'll tell you the answer based on the result of that game.
Yeah, and obviously up next to Fulham, a massive game against West Ham, a side who are really in form and I think have surprised a lot of people this season. David Moyes has done a really good job, and probably not many people expected them to be where they are. Paul, what's your prediction for this one? Do you think Fulham can cause a bit of an upset?
I'll give you one prediction, that Lookman won't take a penalty, especially after that Panienka effort that he chipped into the keeper's hands at the London Stadium. I think West Ham come into the beatable bracket, but there again, you see, it's a bit crazy, isn't it? Because, who would have thought Liverpool would be losing to certain sides? You just think, whoa, how did that happen? Liverpool 0, Brighton 1. You talked earlier, Ian, about missing fans. I think the mighty Reds are certainly doing that. So, West Ham could be tight. It could be close. I mean, Fulham score a goal and they get an early goal, then they have everything in their armoury to defend that one goal. They can defend for their lives. So an awful lot will depend. If West Ham go in 2-0 up at half time, game over like it was at Leicester.
What do you think the final score will be?
Heart 1-0, head 1-1.
What about you, Ian? What's your score prediction?
I think Fulham can nick this. I do. I think because they have to. I really do. I'm not convinced West Ham are all that great. They, Moyes has done a great job, etc. But they're in a very false position. I think, you have to look at this game and say we can win this game. I'm going to go Fulham 2-0.
Very bold. I'm sure the Fulham fans will like that one. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you again soon.